Hey guys, everseen here. Before we get into the video, I just want to express how thankful I am for all of the constructive and kind comments in my last defenses video. It really means a lot to me, and I'm proud to be a part of the PoE community, where people have a hunger for knowledge and we simply all just learn together. So again, thank you. I had some really good suggestions from a lot of players talking about combinations that I thought we should touch on in today's video. I'm going to go over some other basic defensive layers, and then we will talk about a couple combinations of items that are very strong. So the first thing I want to talk about is a bit of sustain when it comes to your character. This is going to be life regeneration, life recoup, and life leech. You can also go for energy shield regeneration, energy shield recharge, etc. But I'm just going to cover the life portion. So there are some key differences between each of these mechanics. Life regeneration is life regenerated over 1 second. Life recoup is life recovered over 4 seconds. Life recoup is interesting because recovery does not go away at full life. But what would be recovered during the time your life is full is completely wasted. Life leech is a little more complicated though. If you have instant leech, it is, well, instant. However, life leech actually isn't instant by default and is recovery over time unless this is changed slightly with things like the leech mastery for 10% of leech is instant. For a hardcore player like myself, I prefer to go for life regeneration or life recoup over leech. PoE is a game of many disconnects, and I would prefer my character have a chance at survival when that happens. It doesn't hurt to have all three of these incorporated into your build though. The next thing I want to cover are guard skills. I'll be explaining Molten Shell, Arcane Cloak, Immortal Call, and Steelskin. Molten Shell is a staple in Path of Exile defense. Combined with cast when damage taken, you can securely have decent uptime on this skill to drastically improve your maximum hit in PoE. Or, however, you can alternatively cast the spell yourself, or you can obtain a Val version of the skill and use this manually, but still have the original version used under cast when damage taken. A key thing to note about Val Molten Shell is that when you use the Val version of the skill, the regular version will be overwritten. This is commonly used in boss fight scenarios since the Val version of the skill is much better for mitigation. The skill provides armor and 75% damage from hits goes to Molten Shell before your life or energy shield, making it a very strong defensive layer. Similarly to Molten Shell, Arcane Cloak will take 75% of damage from hits before your life or energy shield. However, it spends 45 to 64% of your current mana to do so. The skill also grants flat lightning damage equal to 10 to 14% of the mana spent. So basically this buff acts as a defensive and offensive layer because the offensive capability is shockingly good. Get it? Shockingly. Immortal Call is an interesting skill because you can use this without any endurance charges and still get the buff for at least 1 second. If you're playing a build with tons of access to endurance charges, then this is the guard skill for you. It states that it can consume up to 5 endurance charges with 15% less physical damage taken per charge. That means you can get a total duration of 2 seconds from the skill with 5 endurance charges consumed, with the base cooldown being 3 seconds. Another thing to note about Immortal Call is that it synergizes really well with increased skill effect duration. For example, you can find increased skill effect duration from things like the increased duration gem or on the passive tree. Steelskin can be used to take 70% of damage taken from the buff before life or energy shield up to a maximum of 2,209 damage. The caveat to this skill, opposed to Molten Shell, would be its buff grants immunity to bleed. This can be better in some cases depending on what build you're playing. Keep in mind that we need to either manually cast these guard skills or link them to things like cast when damage taken or automation. Okay, so now let's talk about the Pantheon. The Pantheon is unlocked while progressing through the campaign, and it has significant buffs that your character can use. You can allocate 1 major and 1 minor Pantheon at a time. They can be upgraded with a Divine Vessel placed inside of the map device with the map to the corresponding boss. I'll highlight some Pantheons that I frequently use and can maybe help you out, but I would strongly recommend reading all the features within each and getting a better understanding. The minor Pantheon that I love and use on most of my builds is Ralikesh. It's my favorite because moving while bleeding no longer causes damage, and this is an instant pick whenever I progress through the campaign. It's first obtained by killing Groost in Act 7. The upgraded version is also not bad to limit the amount of corrupted blood stacks you have on your character at one time. I use this on characters that have a sufficient amount of sustain and physical mitigation, so it barely does any damage to me, because corrupted blood, if you don't know, is a physical damage over time debuff. Another great minor Pantheon would be Aberath, since with the upgraded version, we can become unaffected by burning ground. Lastly, another one I would like to mention is Garukon. This one's kind of underrated. This Pantheon can provide reduced effective shock up to 60%, and in combination with this wheel on the passive tree, we can get an additional 50% reduced effective shock and +1 to all maximum elemental resistances. Keep in mind that reduced effect is not immunity, and typically, if possible, I strive for immunity. Reduced effect means that you're still going to get shocked or chilled in this case. The major Pantheon that I use the most would probably be Brine King. This helps with stun and can provide immunity to freezing once it's upgraded. The stun portion is really big though because it mitigates shotgunning on your character, which basically means being stun locked and unable to move. I always prefer getting true stun immunity over this though. Arcane is also really good against degens and chaos damage. Solaris and Lunaris are great depending on the scenario you're in. I typically use Solaris to get that extra physical damage reduction against bosses. Lunaris is also great though, providing a similar feature, and the upgraded versions are very good, providing projectile avoidance and reduced elemental damage if hit recently. Now let's get into some item combinations that were in the comments of the last video. Shout out to Lucio and Cardi for introducing me to the Mahuxotl's Machination and Tempered by War combination. This combination has one insanely strong interaction, but also several other beneficial ones as well. Mahuxotl's provides Divine Flesh without the use of Glorious Vanity. Divine Flesh states that 50% of elemental damage is taken as chaos damage. However, when combined with Tempered by War, we take effectively 0% lightning and cold damage. Tempered by War comes from the Lethal Pride Jewel under the influence of Rakiata to transform a Keystone on the passive tree to this Keystone. Tempered by War states that 50% of cold and lightning damage is taken as fire damage. This means that if 50% of fire, cold, and lightning damage gets converted to chaos damage, the remaining 50% of cold and lightning damage gets converted to fire damage. With scaling, maximum fire, and chaos resistance, this can provide you with an insane layer of mitigation. This item gives the following effects to your character and has some interesting modifiers we need to take note of. When we reach full energy shield, we will sacrifice all energy shield to gain +5 maximum resistances for 4 seconds. Really strong, right? However, we cannot recharge or regenerate energy shield. So how do we obtain it? We use things like energy leech support, a Watcher's Eye with energy shield gained on hit while affected by discipline, and a couple uniques that can give energy shield gained on hit like Malachi's Mark and Venomous Spinnerets. We can also use the Ghost Dance Keystone to gain Ghost Shrouds. When hit, you will consume a Ghost Shroud to gain 3% of your evasion as energy shield. There are other sources as well, but these are some of the examples that I had in mind. One thing about this shield is that it's difficult to offset the downside of 5% of energy shield lost per second, and generally energy leech support is not sufficient enough alone. Because this shield grants us no energy shield recharge, no regeneration, or life regeneration, we are solely going to rely on leech or recoup to sustain this build. Leech usually caps at full life and stops leeching entirely. This shield combats that by also granting us life leech effects even when our life is full. To further this interaction, once your life is full, you will begin to leech energy shield. Another item that you can use in combination would be the Defiance of Destiny amulet for a bit more sustain on your build. Now let's talk about Progenisis and Petrified Blood. So Petrified Blood is a skill that can confuse a lot of players, including myself. The most important thing to note is that Petrified Blood specifies that it only works with damage from hits, and is significantly weak to degens or damage over time. I had the pleasure of trying this skill in the Cast When Stunned Detonate Dead of Chaining Chieftain in Affliction League. Petrified Blood states that you cannot recover your life above low life. To fully make use of this interaction, we want to allocate the life mastery to ensure we count on low life at 55% life. Petrified Blood at a level 20 and 20 quality gem states that when taking damage from hits, 40% of life loss below half-life is prevented. Then 76% of life loss prevented this way is lost over 4 seconds. Over 4 seconds is going to be a very important mechanic to pay attention to. This interaction basically means that if we take 100% damage, Petrified Blood will prevent 40% of the damage, meaning we take 60% initial damage. Then, over 4 seconds, we will take 76% of that remaining 40% damage. We effectively take 30.4% damage over 4 seconds. This means almost 10% of all damage is completely gone as long as you have the proper recovery. This is a very strong interaction that can be paired with things such as life recoup, life regeneration, and life leech. As long as you're not one-shot, you will effectively be mitigating more damage than you would without using the skill. An item that pairs really well with Petrified Blood is the Progenisis Amethyst Flask. Flask states, when hit during effect, 25% of life loss from damage taken occurs over 4 seconds instead. From Sourcing PoE Wiki, it states that Progenisis effect is first, followed by Petrified Blood, and they are multiplicative. Progenisis is an interesting item because it can be scaled with increased flask effect. For example, with 50% increased flask effect, you can get an additional 12.5% additional life loss taken over 4 seconds, for a total of 37.5%. You can scale this even further, and at 300% increased flask effect, you can scale this buff to a whopping 75%. So in total, you'd have 100% damage taken over 4 seconds, and as long as you have the right recovery, you're immune to hits. Petrified Blood can also be scaled with increased gem quality, giving it additional minus 0.25% per 1% quality. Therefore, 76% of life loss prevented from that 40% damage taken over 4 seconds modifier can be scaled down much lower than 76%. Now let's look at some real numbers to simplify some understanding. 5,000 damage taken as a hit. Progenisis will give you 75% initial hit and 25% taken over 4 seconds. This means it'll be 3,750 as initial and 1,250 taken over 4 seconds. Now if we apply Petrified Blood to this, we'll take that 3,750 damage and multiply it by 60%, because that's what we will be taking initially. Our new initial hit will be 2,250 damage. And for the damage taken over 4 seconds, we're going to multiply the 1,500 damage by 76%. This is going to give us 1,140 damage taken over 4 seconds. So, if we add up the damage taken over 4 seconds, we get 2,390 damage taken over 4 seconds. So in total, under both of these effects, if we take 5,000 damage, we effectively take an initial hit of 2,250, and we take 2,390 damage over 4 seconds. This is pretty staggering because we're essentially taking half the damage from a hit initially. Combined with things like life recoup, we are offsetting the damage taken over 4 seconds by recovering it over 4 seconds. This is at a baseline too. This doesn't even take into account with scaling increased flask effect, which really makes this interaction shine, and we can scale up and up and up even further. I'd like to take the time to reference another amazing video that I watched for the Progenisis and Petrified Blood interaction by Sergeant Minor. If you'd like some additional examples, he covered it really well in his video and had some examples that were different than mine. So another item we compare with this combination is the Defiance of Destiny amulet. This amulet is insanely strong and has very good synergy. Defiance of Destiny just by itself is an impressive defensive layer because we can scale the amulet with fertile catalysts to have gain 42% of missing unreserved life before being hit by an enemy. For example, let's say we have 5,000 life. If we are at 1 out of 5,000 life, we will gain 2,099 life before being hit. Notice the wording in the item too, which states before, not when hit. The reason this item is so strong is because before each individual hit, you will be gaining 42% of your unreserved life, and in my opinion, this is one of the strongest items in the game on par with the Mage Blood belt. Another example, if we have 2,500 out of 5,000 life, we will recover 1,050 life. Therefore, this amulet is really strong, serving as instant recovery, which is the strongest form of recovery in the entire game. And that's going to do it for today's video, guys. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for taking just a little time out of your day to come and hang out with me and chat some PoE. If you'd like to see more, make sure to like and subscribe, and you can even catch me on Twitch every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9 a.m. Eastern. I'll just be streaming some HCSSF and hanging out. Thanks again, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.